What can game designers learn from Flashmobs? Hello there, my name is Gabe Mac from thegamebeyond.com, and today I want to talk about what it is that game designers can learn from Flashmobs. Now, I know you're probably thinking, oh, Flashmobs, that's so passé. But actually, Flashmobs date back a lot longer than just the recent 2000s when everybody started doing freezes and, stopping in place and dance routines in malls and stuff. Actually, the history goes back a little bit further than that. We're not only going to look at the history today, but we're also going to look at a couple of other things. What we're really going to be looking at today is not necessarily flash mobs, but what they come under is this term in art called the happening. Here we see a happening of a giant pillow fight. Now, today I want to go through what these happenings are. How do we see them, coming out in flash mobs? How do we see it come out in collaborative art? How do we see these online gatherings or interactive art or even these alternate reality games using this core idea of the happening to really make an impact and go virally around the world? So that is what we're going to be talking about today. Actually, it's not really flash mobs. Flash mobs is a small part of it, but we're going to be talking about happenings. Yeah? As game designers, essentially that's what you're doing. You're making these little happenings happen all the time for your players, for whoever's playing. You get together with a group of other gamers to play Dungeons and Dragons. That's a happening. You guys all get dressed up in all kinds of LARP outfits, live action role playing. You go into the woods and go one normal, right? That's a happening. So those alternate reality games, all these different things are happenings. Now, what can we see, or what do we know are the core elements of a happening? So let's look at some of the core elements of a happening. First, we want to answer, what is a happening? What is it that we can really define is a happening? Secondly, we're going to look at how they started. Thirdly, we're going to look at a little bit of the history behind these happenings, how it evolved, and then we're actually going to look at how do we make a happening of our own. Yeah, so a little what is, how did it happen, why did it happen, and how to do one yourself, right? So that's what we're going to go through. But before we go through and start dealing with how to make a happening stuff, let's look at some examples of a couple happenings. Now, these are going to range from very small to very big, something that you could do with just a couple of friends to something that takes maybe a lot more organization. The first one we're going to look at is the UCD ATM applause. Now, this is actually a pretty simple happening that you can see here. What happens? It's a typical day. People are going about their normal business. Everything seems pretty normal. Nothing is really out of the ordinary. Nothing is, going away from the status quo here. And yet at one point, what we see is the following. So what are we seeing here? Well, what we see is a simple flash mob where the rules are pretty simple. At the stroke of midday, whenever someone takes cash out of the ATM, everybody stands around and applauds. It's not too hard of a thing to kind of whisper around to people and get people to do. A very simple rule set, a very simple happening, and something that you may have witnessed yourself. So let's look at a couple of other happenings, if we may. I want us to get a little bit of an idea of how these flash mobs have really taken this idea of the happening, which is probably the closest, most modern example that we have of happenings is these different flash mobs. Let's go ahead and take a look at some really great flash mobs that were created by one group called Improv Everywhere. Now, you may have seen Improv Everywhere if you'll live in New York, you know, with the No Pants Day, or possibly the Central Station Freeze. The Look Up is one experiment, one thing we're going to look at, and the MP3 experiment. So I want to look at a couple of these different flash mobs and happenings that were created by Improv Everywhere, this improv group out of New York City. So the first one that we want to have a look at is Look Up. Now, this is an interesting one because it required a number of people to basically go to a space with a certain clothing and create essentially a visual art or a visual performance art, if you will. So let's have a look at the first one.